Hello, everyone. Coming up next is a dramatic and captivating development that will definitely not disappoint those of you who have been following my channel. During what was supposed to be a harmless visit from the Dupree family, Tracy was in no way prepared to become a witness to a single moment that could fracture the meticulously constructed power structure of Fairmont Crest. She moved through the house with the mindset of someone simply fulfilling a social obligation, letting her gaze drift over the reception spaces out of habit, convinced that the day would pass like any other lavish visit. Proper handshakes, carefully calculated compliments, laughter, pitched just loud enough that no one could quite hear anything real beneath it. And yet, with just one delayed step, one pause at the threshold of the bar area, everything inside her suddenly changed color. Tracy froze right at the borderline between the hallway and the bar, where soft golden light spilled down over the neatly arranged display of spirits, glass bottles lined up in perfect rows like an innocent backdrop. That space should have been nothing more than a refined corner for guests to take a breath, sip a drink, and shake off the stiffness of etiquette. But in that instant, it became the stage for a scene that, by the mere act of seeing it, made her feel as though she had set foot in forbidden territory. Right in front of Tracy, Vernon was standing far too close to Sharon, at a distance anyone who had lived in a world of unspoken rules would recognize as beyond the bounds of social decorum. It was not the accidental lean of someone edging closer to hear over the music, not a fleeting brush of hands while reaching for the same glass of wine. It was an intimacy that was shadowed, slow, and deliberate. Their bodies were not quite touching, but the space between them had tightened to the point of warping, like a taut, silent wire into which any third-party gaze would instantly embed itself as evidence. Vernon inclined his head closer than necessary, his shadow falling across half of Sharon's body, and although Tracy could not hear a single word they were saying, she could feel the air around them thicken, turning heavy with that particular energy that only exists when something is present between two people that cannot be named. It was not just desire or momentary attraction. It was a bond that had traveled far past any safe boundary line, infused with compromise, defiance, and a level of recklessness that no one bearing the Dupree name could ever afford to let an outsider see. Tracy felt her heart clench as if someone were squeezing it from the inside. It wasn't jealousy, nor was it a personal wound, but the way instinct outran reason and instantly sketched out the chain reaction that would follow if this scene were to fall into the eyes of someone else. Someone who couldn't keep their mouth shut, or worse, someone who knew exactly how to weaponize what they saw. Just one more pair of eyes on what she had just witnessed, and the reputation of the Dupree family, built from immaculate photographs, carefully staged interviews, and public appearances tailored down to the last detail, could go up in flames in a matter of hours. She could almost see the speed at which whispers would spread, the grainy, hurried snapshots, the stream of messages traded between other families in the community, all spiraling toward the weak point every powerful clan fears most, the crack in the image of the person at the top. There would be no need for a financial scandal or a public legal dispute. A single story of infidelity, told with enough skill, could send tremors through an entire web of alliances stitched together by false trust and handshakes of convenience. And yet, what sent a deeper chill through Tracy was not the proximity between Vernon and Sharon, nor the way their shadows melded into each other under the golden light, but the almost eerie calm on Sharon's face. There was no awkwardness, no startled flick of the eyes, no instinctive recoil of someone who suddenly realizes she has stepped too far into dangerous ground. Sharon tilted her body slightly, receiving that closeness as if it were a familiar part of her life, as if she had long since grown used to stepping into forbidden zones without any real fear of being caught. There was nothing in her posture that resembled a woman who had lost her way. Instead, she carried the aura of someone who had already chosen a side, fully aware of the cost of existing so near to power, and perfectly willing to pay for it with a kind of ruthless composure. That effortless ease to Tracy was more terrifying than the potential scandal itself, because it proved that this was not the first time such a moment had unfolded. It was likely only a small fragment of an entire sequence of similar encounters that had taken place behind carefully closed doors. Tracy felt as though she had just yanked back the curtain on a room she had never intended to enter. In that brief yet agonizingly long instant, she could almost hear the axis of the story shifting. Relationships she had once assumed were unshakable, alliances she had believed to be immovable pillars, now appeared in her mind like panes of glass coated with mist. They looked solid from afar, but one forceful touch would shatter them into countless sharp pieces. She thought of Anita, of the way that woman always occupied the unquestioned role of hostess, always keeping the Dupree household upright in every party and ceremony. She thought of how people spoke about Vernon, not just as the head of a family, but as a stabilizing force for all of Fairmont Crest, as the symbol of controlled, reliable power. And now, with just one fleeting frame of Vernon and Sharon together, everything once considered untouchable suddenly felt fragile. In Tracy's mind, layers of memory flashed and stacked themselves. The time she had heard Sharon described as intelligent, poised, someone who knew exactly where to stand. The meetings where Sharon appeared, maintaining just the right distance from everyone, always knowing when to stay silent and when to speak. That was not the profile of a chaotic risk-taker, but of someone who understood the rules at Fairmont Crest intimately, and still chose to break them in a way that made it difficult for anyone to pin down concrete proof. It struck Tracy then that the woman standing beside Vernon was not just another person, but a volatile piece on the board, one that could alter the direction of every strategy if placed in the wrong position. And she herself, who had just happened to witness this, suddenly, unwillingly, became part of an equation she had never wanted to be written into. From the ballroom behind her, sounds continued to drift in, the clinking of glasses, laughter tuned to a precise level of cheerfulness, background music gliding along without a single jarring note. Taken together, they created the perfect backdrop for the polished surface of life at Fairmont Crest, in stark contrast to the frantic rhythm of Tracy's heartbeat. She felt as though she were standing at the edge of a cliff, with a fog-filled chasm below where the community's secrets were buried, only emerging now and then through half-spoken rumors. One step back, and everything would return to normal. She could pretend she had seen nothing, continue to play the role of the courteous observer. But one step forward, just a longer look, one more second of eye contact, or the simple fact of someone realizing she had been standing there, and she would be pulled into the eye of a storm whose ending no one could predict. Tracy understood that from that moment on, she was no longer an outsider. What she had seen, what she remembered, what she might one day say or choose to bury, each of those would automatically become a variable in the story of the Dupree family. It did not feel like privilege or power. It felt like being forced to sign a dangerous agreement without the chance to read the terms. The more she thought about it, the more one truth crystallized. For families like the Duprees, secrets are never merely private. They are tethered to assets, to status, to the unspoken arrangements that keep the entire community running. An affair at Fairmont Crest does not just destroy a household. It can jolt the very network of connections that keeps the system from collapsing. She lingered on Sharon a moment longer and noticed that in the woman's eyes there was not only tranquility, but a faint glint of something that looked like intent. Sharon did not glance around like someone afraid of being discovered. She stood firm, one shoulder slightly angled, as if she were accustomed to existing right at the blurred boundary between right and wrong. That realization made it hard for Tracy to breathe. If Sharon was this comfortable in such a moment, If Vernon showed no hint of discomfort in allowing the distance between them to shrink to something so dangerous, then when had this story truly begun? How many parties, how many meetings, how many seemingly harmless occasions had already contained scenes like this, tucked away in corners no one paid attention to? The question set her mind spinning, as if she were standing at the entrance of a maze where every path led to a more alarming possibility. In Tracy's thoughts, the image of Fairmont Crest, with its perfectly trimmed lawns, glowing houses, and luxury cars gliding through the security gate, suddenly slipped, revealing a foundation riddled with cracks. She realized that what kept this community running smoothly was not only its formal rules, but also a silent consensus among those powerful enough to keep their shadows hidden. If this secret between Vernon and Sharon were to be exposed, it wouldn't only strike at the Dupree family, it would also jab at that entire unspoken agreement. People would have to choose sides. They would have to decide whether to defend the image of a leading family or let the wildfire of public opinion burn everything down so something new could be rebuilt. And in every version of that choice, Tracy knew the position of the one who knows too much is always the easiest to sacrifice. She shifted her weight slightly, as if to retreat, trying to pull herself back from the danger line. But at that exact moment, Vernon happened to look up. His eyes, for a single razor-thin heartbeat, landed directly on the spot where Tracy was standing. No sound escaped, no name was spoken, yet it was enough to send a numb wave through her entire body. Time seemed to slow suddenly, every detail sharpened. The light glancing off Vernon's cheekbone, Sharon's back obscuring a portion of the bar, the chill of the stone floor beneath the tip of her shoe. In that brief exchange of looks, she could not tell whether what she saw in his eyes was surprise, caution, or calculation. But she was certain of one thing: her presence had been registered. What washed over her felt like the moment a pen touches paper to sign a verdict in which she herself is implicated. No one that asked her to sign, no document lay on the table, yet the truth that had just been handed to her, the truth of how dangerously close Vernon and Sharon had stood, had turned into an invisible contract. Either she would bury it and live with the constant dread that one day someone would discover she had known all along and stayed silent, or she would speak and accept being swept up in all the consequences that confession would unleash. Whichever path she chose, the peace she once had, the safe perimeter she had occupied in the story of Fairmont Crest, was gone. Tracy did not need much imagination to understand that from the moment Vernon's gaze collided with hers, she had been drawn into a circle with no obvious exit. If she pretended she had seen nothing, would Vernon believe her? Would Sharon begin to view her as a latent threat? If she started avoiding them, would that only feed suspicion? And if she behaved as though nothing had changed, would she be able to keep that knowledge from leaking into her eyes, her tone, her stride? Those questions did not need to be spoken aloud. They rose of their own accord, threading together into a knotted cord pressing hard against her chest. For one fleeting moment, Tracy wished she had turned down a different hallway, that she had never stopped, that she had chosen any other second than this one to glance toward the bar. She wished the Dupree visit had unfolded in the dull, forgettable way everyone expected. A few trivial conversations, some polite compliments, an evening no one would remember in detail. But that was not what happened. Instead, here she was, carrying on her shoulders a secret no one had asked her to hold, yet heavy enough to shift the axis of the entire narrative. And the only thing she could do now was keep her expression smooth, steady her breathing, and pretend she was merely passing through, that the moment their eyes met had never existed. Even so, however convincingly she might pretend, Tracy knew the image of what she had seen today would not easily loosen its grip on her mind. It would follow her into future parties, into every appearance the Dupree family made together, into each public smile Sharon offered, into every speech Vernon gave about honor, duty, and tradition. Every time their gazes brushed across a room, she would remember that too close distance in front of the bar and the icy jolt that had raced down her spine when Vernon's eyes caught hers. She understood that sometimes a single moment of being seen is enough to permanently alter the way people treat one another, even if no one ever says a word about it. From that point on, the story of Fairmont Crest could no longer be the same inside Tracy's heart. This place was no longer just a flawless portrait of the elite, but a labyrinth of compromises, shadows, and wordless looks. And she, though she had never wanted it, had become a keeper of secrets standing at the crossroads of too many paths. Surrounded by music and glowing lights still blazing outside, she knew she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return, the threshold of knowing. Once she had seen, she could not unsee. Once she had been seen in return, she could not walk out of the story without leaving a trace. And in that realization, she felt most acutely that she had entered into an invisible contract with fate itself, one sealed by the cold gaze of a secret and the pounding heartbeat of someone who had become a witness by sheer accident.